Hello, hi. This is Dally. Nice to be with you folks tonight. We're going to do our Path to 250 webinar tonight. Really, the short version of first aid for the USMLE Step 1. My name is Tally again. I am an associate clinical professor of allergy immunology at the University of Louisville, but better known to most of you as the senior editor for the First Aid for the Board series, and also the founder and chief education officer for USMLE-Rx and ScholarRx, which includes our question banks, our bricks, our videos, digital flashcards, and so forth. So, but for the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to relax. That's the first word in first aid, because we want you to be deliberate in your thought process in terms of preparing for the exam, whether it's next month or next year. There's always time to think through how you want to approach the exam. And so, in the next hour or so, we'll go over the basics. We'll talk about how you can define your goals. We'll provide you some timely USMLE updates. A lot's been going on with the USMLE over the last year. Talk about timelines for studying, how you can approach each subject, choosing prep resources. We'll talk about some study advice. We'll talk a little bit more bricks and about Rx Coach, towards the end. And if you're around later on in this webinar, Louisa will put all your names in a hat and pull out a couple of winners for a special raffle prize, which includes 5 hours of Rx Coach access and 6 months worth of access to Rx 360 Plus. That includes our new and constantly improving Qbank, our bricks for curriculum, our videos and digital flashcards, and access to a digital version of first aid. And then we also have a special offer as well too, where you can save quite a bit to get these well-priced resources. And then we'll stick around for some Q&A, and hopefully have some good discussions about how we can help you with the USMLE. All right, great. So I'm going to start off with a poll question. I want to see who's out there this evening. So let me get to that, and we're going to ask a question, which is, who are you? I want to know if you're in the US, outside the US, if you're an international medical student or a US student. So take a moment to answer the poll. It'll take a couple of seconds for the data to roll in, so I'll leave it open for a good 30 seconds. Especially for whatever reason, especially from international locations, it does take a little, for whatever reason, for the data to come in. But I will wait another 10 seconds. We got about half of you have responded, and we've got close to 2/3. We'll wait a few more seconds, and then I will share the results. Okay, most of you have answered. I'm going to share the results, and what we see is that most of you are international medical graduates born outside the US, but we also have quite a few folks that are US students and US students studying abroad at international schools. So welcome to everybody. And then I'm going to ask the second question, which is, when do you plan to take the exam? So I'm going to launch that poll and go ahead and provide an answer. Hopefully it'll come in faster now that hopefully you've all found your buttons or the control panels in your app or on your PC or Mac. So again, we'll wait and gather all the results. And it'll probably take about a good 15-20 seconds for the results to roll in. Let's see. We're close to half of you answering. I'll wait till we get about to 2/3. All right, we are almost there. Excellent. We have that. I'm going to share the results, and you can see that the bulk of you are going to be taking your exam in the fall or in 2022 or beyond. But there's obviously a blip. Some of you that are going to be taking it later this summer. When a lot of the M2s often do it in the US. Okay, great. Let me go ahead and minimize that poll. We're going to move on, and now we're going to talk about the basics of the USMLE. So for you, those of you particularly that may be preparing later this fall or just starting preparation, here's just really the basics. this is a 1-hour exam, 280 questions in 7 1-hour blocks, so it's 40 questions per block. And you've got a little schematic here where you can see the blocks laid out. And at some point, you can take a lunch. The lunch is not, dictated to you. We just put this there as a placeholder where you'll want to take a break, and you can take, as many breaks as you want, as long as it doesn't exceed, your break time. You've got a minimum 45 minutes of break time, but you can get more break time if when you get into the orientation module, you do that ahead of time. Basically, the orientation module, you can download this at usmle.org, and you should obviously review that before you go walk in and do the real exam. And when you're in the exam, if you go into and you're in the Prometric testing center, and you just go in and just use it to adjust your headphones, and then just immediately exit, then you will capture close to 15 minutes. So for most of you, should be able to start off with 60 minutes of break time. Okay, great. All right, so now let's talk about the question types. There is one primary type, which is a single best answer. Some of the questions do have multimedia. Most of the questions are case-based which is 85, and with multi-step reasoning. Now the vignettes themselves, are getting shorter. They used to be really long, but in the last year or two, the USMLE has really, made them much more succinct. And you will notice that when you look at the new practice examples that have been released by the USMLE, in the past 6 to 9 months. And so, an example of a vignette that also, by the way, incorporates multi-step reasoning, where they tie together multiple disciplines and organ systems. It could read something like this: a 32-year-old woman presents with a 5-day history of occasional double vision and bilateral ptosis, and then it asks, what is the most appropriate diagnostic test? You'll recognize immediately that you're dealing with more than one step, right? And when you break it down, you'll realize that obviously you need to make you need to have a presumptive diagnosis based on the presentation, and then once you actually have that preliminary diagnosis, then you have to think about what is the most appropriate diagnosis test, right? So in this case, you're probably with this younger woman who has a 5-day history of occasional double vision and the symmetric ptosis bilateral, you're probably dealing with something like myasthenia gravis. You can see multiple sclerosis occasionally presenting like this, but it tends to more likely have a unilateral set of findings. So in this particular case, the most appropriate diagnostic test is anti-acetylcholinesterase and antibody assays. Historically or classically, in some parts of the world, you can challenge the patient with a short with a dose of idursulfase, which is a short-acting acetylcholinesterase, and classically that's called the Tensilon test, because that was the name of the drug when it was used in the United States. So that's an example of a 2-step question where you have to break it down to 1, what's the diagnosis, and then 2, once you know what the diagnosis is, then what is the most appropriate diagnostic test to make that diagnosis. All right. So on the boards, about half the questions are multi-step exam questions. Some are occasionally 3-step questions, and you'll also occasionally run into problem-solving questions as well. All right, great. So now let's talk about the exam itself. This is the interface. You can see here it's a pretty straightforward interface. You can see up at the top, you've got the clinical vignette, and then what the question is, also called the lead-in, that's the technical term. You'll have a minimum 4 choices, but more often you'll have 5, occasionally 6 choices, and then you'll have some sort of clinical imaging or diagram about 15 to 20% of the time. You'll have navigation tools across the top and along the side, and you have the timer at the bottom left. It also has the amount of time remaining in your day, so you can actually plan out your breaks and so forth. And you can lock the exam to use the facilities or whatnot, but just know that the clock is still running. you can, and then when you're ready, when you're done answering all the questions, you can end the block. A couple of things to keep in mind. When you end the block, if there's any time left over, that goes to your break time. Also, you should never ever end a block with any blank questions, because there is no penalty for guessing. So make sure at least you have a guess, and everything is filled out before you end the block. All right. Okay, great. So let's talk about scoring and passing, which is of great importance to the majority of folks. So passing is 194. It's been that way for a couple of years. The mean has been, bouncing around the, high 229, 230. Standard deviation is approximately 20 points. For U.S. medical students, they essentially pass within 3 tries. For IMGs, the pass rate is generally greater than 90% within 3 passes. Though, obviously on the first time around, that pass rate can be a little bit lower. And that goes for whether you're an international medical graduate born in the United States or outside the United States. All right. With regards to USMLE percentiles, this is a visualization. They provided all the data. We just graphed it in first aid. So you can see this is how we graphed it. You can see there's an S curve. And you can see that, as you get higher, the curve flattens out, with regards to percentile. So virtually, if you get, around, the highest 260s or whatever, 260 or above, you're essentially in the 99th percentile. And you can see that the median again is at around 230, and then the meaning passing scores is around the 6th percentile. Okay. This curve gets updated every year or so, with a rolling cohort of 2 to 3 years. With regards to defining your goals, we do like to talk about, pass the exam, beat the exam mean, or acing the exam, right? And we keep it very simple. Passing the exam is doing well above 194. Beating the mean is, of course, 230 or greater. And acing the exam would be roughly 1 standard deviation above the mean, which would be 250 plus. One of the obvious reasons that we need to think about these types of goals is the type of residency you may be interested in, or if you're an IMG, almost any type of residency, given that it's fairly competitive, with regards to coming up from outside the United States. But for U.S. students, these are the very competitive residencies, for everyone, obviously, in general. And this is the mnemonic roads to riches that delineate the very competitive specialties. At this point, with regards to scoring, as you're all aware, USMLE is on track to implement Step 1 pass-fail in January 2020, but they've left a potential out. So so for some of you folks that are perhaps thinking about this in January or February, you cannot be 100% sure. It won't be any earlier than January 2022, but it could certainly be later. We anticipate that they will actually confirm the actual date, hopefully, sometime this summer, but we don't know for sure. A common question we often get is what happens if you've already taken the Step 1 before, in that case, the 3-digit numeric score continues to be reported on the transcript. For DO students that may be on tonight's webinar, the Qmax will also be going past failure year. I'm sure you've already been made aware of it by spring of next year. The other thing, particularly for the IMGs to be aware of, obviously, is the Step 2 CS has been discontinued, and the Qmax version has also been postponed as well. And the ECFMG is adjusting their pathways to allow IMGs to, get through ECFMG certification, without the Step 2 CS. Finally, as you may be aware, starting this summer, examinees will be limited to 4 attempts per USMLE exam. So again, just giving you a reminder of that coming up in the next couple of months. And then finally, with regards to content distribution changes, you're already aware that there are new communication skills items and certain things like systems-based practice, patient safety, professional law, that some of which have been in step 1 is increasingly moving into step 2 CK. And we do actually have a new section on communications in Qmax, so please do check it out. And finally, pharmacology deserves its own mention because it's a little tricky. Yes, there still is pharmacology on step 1, but they're gonna focus mostly on mechanisms and not as much on pharmacotherapy, right? So you're not really required to identify the specific medication for a condition. That being said, for how they often structure the questions, you still need a general good idea of what drugs are used for what, because they often then use that to then test knowledge of mechanism or adverse effects or side effects and so forth. All right, so let's talk about going back to the scores and what they mean. This is some data that I talked about earlier that shows that with regards to USMLE, that it does correlate with some of these competitive specialties. So you can see some of the competitive specialties on the far right, like orthopedic surgery, otolaryngology, dermatology, which is Parasis doing, and you can see that they have higher median scores, and also that pretty much plays out here as well too. So if you're a U.S. medical student, or if you're a U.S. medical student, you're interested in otolaryngology, there's this is an old chart, but bear with me for a second, you'll understand why. You'll see that there's the probability drops off as the score drops. But just keep in mind that you still have a decent chance. It just may not be as good as a chance. If you're an international medical graduate, there's a flatter curve, but it also drops as well too. For U.S. medical students, if you're interested in a primary care specialty or one of the larger specialties, generally the good news in the past has been, even if you've done poorly in the USMLE, you could still match into one of the big specialties like internal medicine, family medicine, pediatrics, and so forth. So the system is potentially forgiving in that way. But again, this is old data, so the curves have likely shifted over time. Great. So with that, I am going to pause and see ask the question here, and which is, what is your USMLE step 1 goal? I want to see based on what I discussed, whether you want to pass comfortably, beat the average, or ace the exam. So we'll leave this open for a good 30 seconds to collect data. There's several hundred of you folks out there from all over the world. I appreciate you showing up from whatever time zone you're in. So we'll keep this open so we can collect your answers. While we're collecting data, I did see a question that came through. Somebody mentioned that some question stems and some Qbanks are very long, whereas the NBMEs are a lot shorter. Could you tell us which one more reflects the question length of actual step 1? The answer is close to the NBMEs, and especially if you looked at the new ones, the NBMEs 25s through 30, you'll notice that the stems are shorter, and so and the examples are shorter. And so we have also, if you looked at our question bank, especially for our new questions in renal, cardiovascular, neural psych, we've also made it shorter to reflect the actual experience of the USMLE step 1. All right, so I am going to close the poll and share the answer, and you can see that 2/3 of you folks want to do ace the exam, and almost everybody else wants to beat the average. Couple want to pass comfortably, which is perfect fine. There is no wrong answer, but obviously in certain cases, you might want to score higher to be more competitive, or particularly if you're an IMG, you want to use that as a way of leveling the playing field. All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and again minimize the poll, and let's return back to the presentation. All right, so in terms of timelines for studying, we try to keep it simple in first aid. For some folks, and particularly for those, who want to pass comfortably, or they've done really well with, standardized exams in the past, we think 1 to 2 month dedicated schedule with, high yield facts from first aid as kind of an umbrella framework, followed by focusing a nice focus on crammable subject areas. We'll talk about that, and doing lots and lots of questions. We're talking about, probably 2 question banks. And for those who need to potentially score higher, or for those, for whom English may not be a first language, or if you've had challenges with standardized exams before, you might want to spread out the studying over time, over a period of 2 to more months, and you'll have to obviously cover more of the waterfront, and you'll probably want to do 2 or even more question banks, and we'll get into the science of why that is. All right. So with regards to study strategies, we in first aid, we talk about making sure you understand your learning preferences. Those are habits that you're comfortable with. Now we'll talk that you may have to change that based on the learning science, but we'll get that to just in a bit. You'll also need to understand the structure and characteristics of the subject that you're studying. For example, microbiology and pharmacology are often easier to study in flashcards or tables, because the types of questions that are being asked, from a conceptual standpoint, are fairly similar. Whereas pathology or physiology in particular, it's really more about the relationship, and it changes, and so you may have to kind of map those things out. And you'll need to also understand the strengths and weaknesses of your curriculum, in terms of making decisions about what you want to supplement or use to prepare. And also, finally, time for a particular subject or system. So, for example, if you're studying neuroanatomy in dedicated, that may just be 1 or 2 days, and so you're mostly going to be doing some high yield review and some question banks, and maybe flashcards. Whereas if you're doing something like pathology or something like that, you can be doing multiple approaches, all of the above plus other things, including some case-based learning, or doing some game-based learning as well too. So it just depends on this on some of these characteristics. So I'm going to spend maybe 5 minutes just for the sake of time going through some of these high yield areas in each of the discipline. So I'm not going to read it all out, right? Like I said, you can go to my blog at first18.com and get this exact talk. So all this information is here. I'm just going to point out some of the themes that you're going to see, as you prepare for these different different subject areas. And as you can imagine, these subject areas obviously translate well into organ systems, if that's how your school prepared you. So the themes that I want to point out that's common to a lot of these subject areas is that while the USMLE Step 1 calls itself a basic science exam, it's quite clinically oriented in the sense that if they're going to test you on anatomy, they're going to mostly test it in specific clinical scenarios. So things related to traumatic injuries and common surgeries. So for example, you may have an emergency room presentation of somebody who comes in with a spiral fracture of the humerus, right? And then they may ask what the what the motor and sensory deficit is in the hand, right? And so you have to think about the innervation and what runs through the humeral groove, and then what might happen if that nerve is injured, and then therefore resulting in certain motor and sensory deficits, right? And you'll see that also in the clinical imaging. So you're not going to see cadavers and stuff like that. You're going to see things that are clinical imaging like X-rays, CTs, and then you would need to apply the clinical anatomy, cross-sectional or sagittal anatomy or whatnot to the various, imaging studies that you're presented with. All right. So that's, a big theme there. Two of the big things, and then the other big theme in addition to clinical is that they will integrate stuff. So, for example, take biochemistry. Again, they will focus on things where there is some clinical application. So, it may be with biochemistry, obviously, we often think a lot of hereditary or congenital disorders that, screw up, your metabolic pathways. And so what's the clinical presentation? So that's where you'll see the integration of pathology with cellular biology, molecular biology, genetics, genomics, and so forth, right? Moving along, so you can pick up on the theme. With microbiology, the thing I would point out is that we often tend to over-focus on bacteriology because, yeah, it's a big part of the exam, but so is immunology and parasitology. And gosh darn it, these days, vaccine immune response is super hot, right, because of COVID-19. But again, they tend to focus on what happens clinically. How do bugs get identified clinically? How do they, get inoculated? How do they spread there? How do they get there? What are the vectors? What are the reservoirs? And how are they treated, right? Okay, pathology, as I mentioned, earlier, it's really obviously a big area, and and even if you want to do above average, you're going to have to spend a significant time in pathology. It's just really an unavoidable subject area. With common disorders, they will give you variations on a theme, and it may not be typical, right? So a kid, showing up with a cough can be one of many things, which it could include asthma, asthma, CF, other causes of bronchiectasis and so forth, and it may not be the most common cause of cough, that shows up, right? Whereas with something that's a rare presentation, they'll tend to stick with a more common set of presentations, but though it won't be complete, and it's not often classical. Age, gender, ethnicity, they can occasionally provide that, and it may or may not be helpful. That being said, they try not to use it to deliberately throw you off. Somebody who has, mediastinal mass is a young woman, just because she's Caucasian doesn't mean she can't have sarcoidosis, right? So don't fall into the trap that that person can only have sarcoidosis because she's black, right? So keep that in mind. Trigger words, mnemonics, buzzwords, stuff like that. Obviously, we use them. We use them in first aid as a mnemonic device, and they're good, visual ways of remembering complicated, manifestations. But remember, on the exam, they're going to give you the clinical description of what that thing is, and so be ready to identify that. And when you do plenty of question bank, questions, you'll see those. You'll see the more clinical description. So get used to that. And then one other thing that's worth mentioning here is that yes, there are images and diagrams. Pathology, histology, also occasionally some videos as well too. The good news is the majority of the time you can often get to the diagnosis without looking at the photomicrography. If you do want to do it after you look at the question first. Use that to form the clinical picture, and then use the photomicrograph once you have that context. But don't freak out about it, and don't use it, and don't be solely dependent on it. All right. With pharmacology, like I said, because it's about treatment, it's going to be one of those things that gets integrated. So again, remember integration. How does it integrate with pathology? How it integrates with biochemistry and physiology and so forth and so on, right? And with pharmacology, what makes it different, and crammable, like biochemistry and to some extent micro, is that they, repeat certain concepts over and over again, such as, they're going to ask questions about mechanisms and toxicity. So regardless of whether it's autonomic or antimicrobial, they'll go back to these themes. And same thing with micro. I should have mentioned that earlier. You know, they, as I mentioned, it's crammed because again they'll go recurrent themes like diagnosis and reservoirs and how do you make the lab diagnosis and so forth. And then with physiology, as I mentioned, tends to be concept oriented, so that's why diagrams work really well. Often integrated into pathology. So you know, it's kind of a very fluid relationship there. So again, keep thinking about the multi-system and multi-subject integration. Psychiatry, you know, we tend to think about mood disorders like depression and so forth, but you know, there's a number of other high-yield clinical disorders that's covered for first aid. So those are listed here. That's pretty straightforward. And then in public health, as I mentioned, some of the stuff with regards to healthcare delivery, ethics, and so forth, you'll still see some of them, but they're increasingly moving to the Step 2 CK. You still will get biostats and epi. That's still pretty high yield. And as I mentioned, with the new communication skills, doctor-patient interaction questions are now much more common on the Step 1. And again, we provide plenty of practice in USMLE-Rx and Qmax for that. So do check it out. So yeah, that's a quick walkthrough. And now we're going to talk really a bit about review resources. You know, as you know, there are all kinds of things out there like text reviews like first aid, Qbanks like USMLE-Rx, you know, question books, case reviews, review courses, tons and tons of apps and websites and things for you to use out there. And you know, the key issue with you is that you don't have all the time in the world and you don't have all the budget in the world either, right? Here's some advice to how to approach that. One, do check out the resource reviews in first aid for the USMLE Step 1. We actually have a shortened version in the book, and we actually have the unabridged version, the expanded version, in our blog at firstaidteam.com. Happy to show you where that is. So even if you don't buy or use the latest version of the book, do go to our blog and check out the resource reviews. It could save you both a lot of time and money and potentially heartache, right? Get your apps and resources early. Use them along with your studies if you're still in school or taking classes. And also try not to overbuy. Most of these resources are now on demand, so you don't have to hoard these resources. And realize that certain things are good for certain subjects. So be discriminating when it comes to picking something and using it and try not to use it as an end all be all. All right. So I am going to ask another question and see if you guys are still with me here. And so what I want to find out is what resources you are using to prepare for the USMLE Step 1. It could be none of the above or all of the above. So just pick the ones that you're pretty much using or planning to use. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's always great to get a sense of what you find helpful, and then we'd be happy to share the results with all your friends here on the webinar. So we're about it's like about a third of the way through. We'll just check, see if there's any questions coming through from Sean or Paras. Not seeing not seeing too much right now. So we'll give it a couple more seconds, and I think we've got plenty of data. Let me go ahead and share it. And what you see is that almost everybody virtually everybody does a question bank. Most people are doing review books and videos, and then a fair number of you folks are doing flashcard and mobile apps as well too. So that's a good spread, and that's pretty typical of what we've been seeing. Okay, moving right along. We're getting to the home stretch here, folks. Let's see. let me get some of this stuff out of the way here so I can see my slides here. Yeah. So as we get into the home stretch, I do want to share some study advice. These are things that students have been passing along to us, and also our RX coaches like Sean and Paras have been counseling their students. In fact, I'll ask them to chime in just a bit. But some of the things that we often talk about is develop your schedule ahead of time. Make sure there's flexibility in it. So that you have time. I'm jumping around here a little bit. That you have time for exercise and scheduling, and that you basically save some of the crammable subjects like biochemistry, micro, and pharmacology towards the end if you've got that type of flexibility in your study schedule. Because it's easier to handle crammable subjects that way. Obviously, if you're the exception is if you're still in your curriculum, you might want to study micro when micro is being taught, for example. So if you do that, you should hopefully be able to have a master schedule that has enough flexibility that you can do it, that you have plenty of break time. And the other thing I'll add is that you probably want to have gaps towards the very end so that you can make adjustments as necessary. If you need to loop back to a certain subject area, or you need to take some additional NBMEs or whatever, as part of the development, and then be able to adjust based on the performance profiles and the estimated scores that they give back to you. The other thing I'll mention is integrate and apply everything. As I mentioned, that was a theme that I discussed. Is they're gonna start off with a case, and then it maybe goes to something with regards to cellular biology, and then what type of class of drugs might be useful to address that cellular mechanism issue, or they may give you some pathology, and then go into some physiologic mechanisms. So be able to, again, connect the dots in a way that is clinically relevant and makes sense. And again, that's what our question bank does a lot of. So especially if you don't have a lot of clinical experience, this will give you a quick sense of how these things can show up in an authentic way on the USMLE Step 1. Finally, I'll just mention that we do have a checklist that's at the beginning of the book. It's right after the acknowledgments, all the stuff in the front. And again, it helps you prepare and think through your process ahead of time. And so, so that you can feel, again, relaxed and grounded, as you approach that important test date. I'll pause here for a minute or two to see if Sean Process, our ARCS coach, has any other words of wisdom that they typically share with their students that they want to share here.
One of the things that we always tell our students is, and we see some questions about this too in the chat box here, is don't be afraid to take an assessment. A lot of students wait on the assessments. They're worried about what it may or may not show as far as the score is concerned. Remember that the assessment is a tool that you can use to really make your study schedule the way you want, plan what you need to study, how you need to study, and really gauge your progress so that you know that you're heading in the right direction. So that's the one advice that we do give to all of our students. The second thing I would say is, a lot of students come to us and they'll say, my friend told me to do this, or my friend said to do this, or I read this online, or I read this on Reddit. And all that advice may be good advice, and it may be coming from a great place, but just keep in mind that you as a student are going to be individual and unique compared to your friends, right? So your strengths and weaknesses will be different. The way you learn will be different. The way you apply what you know will be different. So it's important to not just do something blindly because somebody suggested it, but to make sure you're doing what works best for you. And of course, we're here to help you with that process if needed.
Great, excellent. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, let's move on. Okay, great. So let's talk about the computer-based testing platforms. That's what CBT stands for. As I mentioned, they have a tutorial at the beginning. That's essentially a module that you can again download from USMLE. And again, if you do that ahead of time, it'll save you time when you're in the Prometric Center and gives you extra break time. One of the key pieces of advice is that you should be doing questions all the way through your studies, and that is just good learning science. That's repetitive self-testing and spacing, and there's a lot of science that goes into that. In fact, I was just showing you the logo for the Journal of Science, and there was a study that was published, about 7-8 years ago now. It was in the New York Times actually, where it showed that basically if you self-test yourself, basically retrieval practice, so that's doing question banks and stuff like that, you do much better versus just repeated cramming something or doing concept mapping or just studying it once. And the benefit holds up, even when you're dealing with more complex inferential questions. So when it comes to these types of self-testing options, you've got a number of things out there, right? You have the USMLE sample test, and they've just, 6-9 months ago, they released new items that give you a good sense of what they're like. And as somebody asked earlier, you'll notice that they're shorter than what they used to be. They're trying to be more succinct. And same thing with the MDMEs with forms 25 through 30 that just got released. They're also helpful for the benchmarking, and now they also come with explanations. They're usually around 60, 70 bucks. 200 questions, give you a couple months to do them, and then they'll give you a predicted score and a performance histogram that you can use to adjust your exam preparation. And then there are Qbanks like USMLE-Rx and UWorld and so forth that are great for practice study, and simulations. So for example, USMLE-Rx, we have 2 self-assessments that come along with the Qbank, and then within the Qbank itself, you can set aside questions to do a half-day or full-day simulation in addition to the half-day self-assessments, and then get predicted scores on that. All right. With regards to the learning science, there's more to talk about, and I'll try to boil it down to the key takeaway messages. One is that the research shows that Qbanks are superior to doing flashcards. That's not a surprise. Well done question banks should help you simulate the test day experience, right? Another question is, well, how many questions you need to do better to get a certain score on the exam or whatever. They don't have that question because they don't know where you're starting from, but you're typically needing to do anywhere between 300 to 450 questions to get unique questions to get one additional point on the USMLE Step 1. How many questions you do in total? We think that probably the best answer is probably as many questions as you can, but clearly more than 3,000 questions. So again, the research shows that leads to superior outcomes doing less versus doing less than that. And then the other question that comes up quite often is, should I be repeating Qbanks? And the answer is you can use it if you need to kind of brush off on a particular topic or whatnot, reviewing a topic. But for the purposes of self-testing, it's really doing unique MCQs that you haven't seen before that's going to give you the most benefit. So again, in the study where the students did best, if they did more than 3,000, they had to do more. They had to be unique MCQs. Just repeating MCQ or doing a question bank over and over again doesn't appear to give you that benefit. So that's why we recommend multiple question banks, 2 at a minimum, 3 if you want to do, if you want to score better, or if you have some challenges preparing for standardized exams. Lastly, first aid is proven to actually improve your USMLE score. So again, this is data out of the University of Michigan, and in that study, students who did 3 passes through first aid did better than students who did not. And one way you can do that is with the USMLE-Rx flash facts, flashcards, that are closely tied to first aid that can actually help you test your knowledge, in that area in a way that's interactive, and so you can get through your multiple passes of first aid in an active learning sort of way. All right, Let's talk about test day. So on test day, you're going to be pretty excited. So you might want to watch the coffee and whatnot. You'll be running on adrenaline, and you'll be at a Prometric test center. I know things have been a little dicey lately with the pandemic, but as long as they're not rescheduling you or whatnot, and you can get into it. Remember, it is an office building. Depending on where the location is, it's often chilly. So wear layered clothing so you be comfortable. Occasionally, it can be, rarely can be warm, depending on the location, especially if there's not good sun blockage. So so again, dress comfortably. With the USMLE, they again, as I mentioned, they have been shortening the questions. So you shouldn't really have major issues with big questions. That being said, as part of our 7-step technique for dissecting a question, we do recommend looking at the lead-in, the actual question. Is it asking about the diagnosis? Is it asking about a mechanism? Is it asking about an adverse effect before you go through the case? And again, if you want to learn more about our 7-step methodology for breaking down questions, then you should definitely talk to Sean and Paras, and get an RX coach consultation. Managing the clock, again, you've got 40 questions per block. That gives you, 90 seconds per question, roughly. We recommend that you try to, commit to an answer within 70 to 75 seconds, and then mark it only. And if you're unsure of the answer, but you think you can solve it, then you can mark it and then try to come back, and with the 10 minutes or so you're left, you finish through everything at 70 seconds per item, then you can go back and try to solve it. But keep in mind, don't mark questions that are a lost cause, and mark a reasonable coverage that you can come back and get to, right? And always, like I say, mark something, because again, there's no penalty for guessing. We talked a little bit about the light lunch, or taking snack breaks and so forth. Some people will do 2 blocks, take a break, 2 blocks, take a break, and so forth. Others will go 3 to 3 blocks and then 2 and 2. It's up to you. It depends on your stamina, your level of energy, and if you want to kind of figure out that a little bit, you can create a full day simulation out of your Qmax questions, in the simulation tab, to be able to replicate those test-like conditions to give you a sense of when you should take your breaks and take a light lunch. There's a joke we had when I was in med school called the C reflex. Referring small airway C nerve, C fibers, but it's basically as I mentioned earlier, there are going to be some times where you just don't know the answer. Surprisingly, a lot of the test is doable, right? So you don't have to freak out. And by the way, you can psych yourself out, by the way, if you're always trying to hammer yourself with, the hardest, craziest questions you can find, just remember that the majority of the test is doable. But occasionally there are some questions that are going to appear impossible. And in those cases, if you can't narrow it down, pick your favorite letter, C, B, whatever it is, pick it and go on. Keep in mind that some of the questions are experimental, and it won't count towards your final grade. So cross your fingers that's what it is. You want to save your time for the other questions that are truly solvable, right? With a little extra time. As I mentioned, we've been keeping a close eye on what's been going on with the USMLE, as we mentioned, we've also revised our question banks to more mimic the more concise stems, or what's called the vignettes, in the questions, and you're going to see less extraneous information. And so again, we've done that in a way so that you don't have to, so that you can focus more on, just like what you'll see on the exam. So you'll have more of a realistic situation of what test day is going to be like. We've already been rolling this out for renal, cardiovascular, psychiatry, neurology. Those already have the new updated items. And by the middle of the summer, most of all the rest will have the same features, which is more realistic USMLE stems that are shorter cases, more answer questions, focus explanations that are actually stepwise. Remember, I told you that half the questions have 2 or more steps. When you look at our explanations, we have concise explanations for each step, in terms of what you need to do. Number 1, make the diagnosis. Number 2, then identify the mechanism for that for that disease. So you'll see that we break it out into very logical steps, and that's part of the question dissection. And then, as you're aware, we have these fantastic new learning resources called RX Bricks that are great for giving you a foundational overview of what you should be learning in medical school. It's great to use with your courses and so forth. And then when it comes to test time, you can refer back to these bricks, and we can link you from Qmax to these bricks to help explain the topic. So those are some of the things that you'll be seeing, rolling out over the next couple of months. So do check it out and give us some feedback. Let us know what you like, or how what you like about them, or how we can improve them. So hopefully you guys are seeing them. Particularly those of you who are hopefully already using the platform. So yeah, if you are, please drop a note in the comment. Love to see how it's going for you. As I mentioned, we have a relatively new service called RX Coaches. It's basically high yield tutoring from the same folks that brought you first aid and USMLE-Rx. You can find it at rx-coach.com. And there you can you can do a 160 question assessment as part of it. You can when you get with our tutors, you can get a personalized study plan. As I mentioned, it's got a one-on-one approach with all our tutors being RX certified, and it comes along with access to RX 360, RX 360 bricks and bricks, RX bricks, often called RX 360 plus. And students have been getting great results, often getting anywhere between 30 to 60, and even higher increases on their USMLE outcomes versus what they started when they first came in and did the diagnostics. So it's obviously a proven methodology. So hope to check it out. If you go there, like I said, you can get a free consultation, no cost. They'd be happy to talk to you and find out if they can help you and give you some pointers, in terms of preparing for the USMLE Step 1. All right, and then as I mentioned, in addition to RX Coach, we're out there on social media, so you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course we've got our blog, firstaidteam.com, and I'll quickly jump to it. Here's one of our questions. You can see in the explanation. Well, you can see that again. We've got the more succinct stem that's more typical of the newer NBMEs and the USMLE. And in the explanation for the correct answer, you notice that we break it out to steps. Step 1, make the diagnosis. How do you make the diagnosis of mitral regurgitation? We talk you through it, and then we ask, then we quiz you on the physiology, which is what the question was trying to get at, which was, at what point in the volume loop would you expect, the mitral where the mitral valve to open, right? That would be tied to mitral valve regurgitation. Okay, so do check it out, and you can see that our questions often have high yield diagrams that take you through through the concept in a very visual way.